when you're giving advice, it's a very sacred thing. Last year, we referred out over 1,000 groups to financial advice.
Give us a sense of how the average Australian investor is going.
What we've realized is that transparency on fees, like being upfront, and this is the fee, it's not determined by the amount of assets you have, it's determined by the complexity of your situation. My hope is that we can develop our systems to be so efficient that eventually we bring down the cost of advice, not increase the cost of advice.
The next generation of clients want different things and hang out in different places. You either embrace the change or get left behind. Here's how one advisor is trying to build a modern advice practice. From Equity Mates Media, this is Basis Points, a show that helps advisors find small improvements that compound into big outcomes. My name's Bryce, and along with my co-host Ren, today we're speaking with Owen Raszkiewicz, founder of the Rask Group, about his efforts to build a modern advice practice. Ren, good to be with you.
Bryce, good to be with you. Excited for this one. Owen Raszkiewicz, or Owen Rask, is a name that a lot of people listening are probably familiar with. He's got a thriving podcast, YouTube and social media presence, and has spoken to a lot of the big fund managers that advisors are probably familiar with. But it's really interesting what he's doing now, which is he is trying to take everything he's learned in digital media, the audience that he has, and he's trying to build an advice business off the back of that. And so we wanted to sit down with him and ask him how he is thinking about building a modern advice business, what he's trying to change from traditional practices, but also how he's thinking about engaging with the next generation of clients. Because the one thing that he's particularly privileged to have, and we're particularly privileged to have, is some real insight into how young Australians are thinking about money and investing, thinking about engaging with advice. And we wanted to understand how those insights were driving decisions he was making around building his business and building his advice book.
Yeah, cracking episode with Owen. A lot of actionable takeaways around personal branding, how to think about content to engage new clients. We want to say a massive thank you to our partners here at Basis Points, SIBO, Milford and Orbis Investments. Without our partners, we wouldn't be able to keep all of our content here at Basis Points free.
Now, a reminder before we get into it today, all episodes of Basis Points are accredited by the Financial Advice Association of Australia for CPD points. So if you want to claim your points for listening to this episode, head to the link in the show notes or the YouTube description. There'll be a simple 3-question quiz. Get them right, and we'll send you a certificate to claim your time.
And finally, there's more to Basis Points than just the podcast and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our monthly newsletter where we provide insights from our community on what the next generation of clients are thinking about, investing in, and interested in. You'll find a link in the show notes to subscribe.
All right, well, with that said, let's get to our conversation with Owen Raszkiewicz, the Rask Group's founder and chief investment officer of Rask Invest.
Well, Owen, welcome to Basis Points.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to start by talking about the opportunity in financial advice, something you've obviously identified. Many advisors listening would know you from your podcasts and the media business that you've built. But what was the motivation to build an advice arm for the Rask Group?
Well, it's a good question. Last year, we referred out over 1,000 groups to financial advice. And this year, I would suspect it will be somewhere in the range of 1,000 to 2,000. And as you guys are aware, because you've got a huge community that's really engaged, is financial advice is not always the most scalable. So you have this kind of chicken and egg problem because you want to give people financial advice, but they don't have enough places to go. There's not a place that can accept them all. And so there are some great businesses out there, like say Everest, who I know that you guys know. And then there's Sky in insurance and a few others like that. They're doing a wonderful job of scaling advice, and they do it through great systems and what have you. But frankly, like our community was too big for the partners that we have. We've all scaled together, we've all grown together, but it's a really interesting dynamic, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But in financial services here in Australia, it's much easier and better to have a good business that does ongoing work. So you get people on an OSA, ongoing service arrangement, and you can make a great business with probably 5 staff, right? But when you're trying to serve hundreds, if not thousands in years to come, you kind of need a different take on it. And so given my kind of background, I thought, well, we could probably give that a crack. And the good thing is it doesn't cannibalize any of our existing referral partners and who we still, share the podium with, so to speak. But we kind of pick up a lot of the people that aren't the right fit for those businesses. And so it's been a 1 + 1 = 3 moment. So it was partly because there's a huge opportunity in financial advice in Australia. And the other side is it just complements what our existing advisors were doing.
So that's interesting. So explain that. So how do you see the offer as differentiated from some of these other advice partners you work with?
So say, for example, I can use some real examples. So say like Waddle Partners, which is Drew and Jamie's business, which the two of you know about. Waddle Partners is a great firm based in Melbourne, typically serves the more affluent type client base. And they are a wonderful business at both the SOA stage, so the actual doing the plan, and then also in the execution or implementation. So they're kind of at the higher end, and they have that. They don't need the volume necessarily; they just need the right client fit. We'll take another one of our partners, which is James O'Reilly and the team at Northeast Wealth, also based in Melbourne. So they do a lot of responsible investment management, and so a lot of responsible advice, ethical advice, whatever you want to call it. And so naturally, that's a great service. But it's not right for everyone. Not everyone wants sustainable portfolios, right? Some people do and they love it and they really like that. But realistically, what we saw and what I saw as an opportunity was more so once-off advice. And so a lot of the community were coming to us for more that type of service and more just generalist, a bit of cash flow, even in retirement, which is not always the number one priority for retirement advisors, is the actual cash flow, like budgeting and that sort of a thing. And so we can serve that audience pretty well once off. And because we have the scale, I hope that over time, as our systems get better and better and better, our competitive advantage would be effectively having the ability to do the things that other businesses can't because they can't reach that scale. And so it's a classic, Porter's, not Porter's five forces, but the economies of scale, like a Morningstar moat kind of thing, is if we can get to the economies of scale, we can offer affordable advice. And that doesn't necessarily mean at the lower end in terms of FUM or like fees that people pay, but necessarily like a good value service. And I kind of pride ourselves on being more like Costco than Aldi in that respect. Yeah.
I like that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there are players in the market at the moment who sort of pitch their business very similar to that, Everest being one of them. Like how do you think about differentiation? Is it internally the team you're building? Is it the advice you give? Is it just relying on the media business and the scale you have?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of parts to that. So in a similar way to Everest, we're self-licensed. So that was a really important milestone for us. I think that fortunately ASIC is now making the barriers, I'd say they're not bringing down the barriers, but they're making them more transparent. So people that genuinely have the means to get self-licensed can do that. And there's a fast track process and that sort of a thing. So that was a really important step to be self-licensed, because then it gives us full control over our APL, subject to the overlords of professional indemnity insurance, of course.
Yes.
But so like we were able to get self-licensed. And so that's a big step. You combine self-licensing with the audience, and self-licensing brings a range of other opportunities, such as the ability to partner with whoever you want to partner with, and really just grow the network. And so our differentiation would probably be that we kind of own the audience. Similar to yourselves, we have the audience, so we can effectively offer the service that we want to offer to the community members at the right time. And if we can't, then they can go to one of our partners. And effectively, that's effectively our competitive advantage. And I think you guys have done this really well in that throughout the world, there's a lot of product businesses. And when I say product, I also mean service-based businesses. Like it's becoming increasingly apparent to people now that you can use vibe coding or like very kind of primitive software engineering to build a product and stand it up. But then you've got to market it and you've got to build the trust. And I think that the harder of those two things is actually the trust and the content side of things. And so we've established ourselves over 7 or so years now that they can trust us. And so it's effectively finding an opportunity for people to get the right product. And if like our partners are amazing, but if no one else is doing it, then we'll step in and do that.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of advisors who are thinking about building their own channels, and we want to pick your brain on sort of how they can do that better and build that trust better. But before then, I think, at Rask Group, you would touch hundreds of thousands of Australians each month. And so you have some pretty unique insights when it comes to what everyday Australian investors are facing and what they're challenged with, and where they turn to advice for help. So give us a sense of how the average Australian investor is going, and particularly when it comes to advice and advisors, what are you hearing from them?
I think that increasingly people in our community, which is more of a DIY self-starter kind of community, similar to your own, people don't want to commit everything at the outset, which advisors listening to this would be familiar, but typically ongoing service arrangements, which is the either a percentage or the monthly fee or quarterly fee that you pay, kicks in once the statement of advice is signed. So you pay, say, $5,000, $10,000, whatever the case may be, for a statement of advice. And then you've got this ongoing kind of percentage or monthly fee. Our business doesn't do that. So our business is one fee for the whole year. You can get it in a payment plan if you want, like kind of like just break up the fee. But what we've realized is that transparency on fees, like being upfront, and this is the fee. It's not determined by the amount of assets you have. It's determined by the complexity of your situation. I think the audience really gravitates to that. And that comes back to, the way they think about investing now with ETFs, with platforms and brokerage fees. Big icon in the US is Ramit Sethi, and he talks about like not having percentage-based fees baked into things. And so wherever we can, we try and avoid that as much as possible and just bring that transparency to people. And I think for anyone in the advice community, there's kind of a cynical take that fixed fees are just percentages done in a different way with a different symbol next to them, which is fair enough. Like that, it is fair that you can do a quote, just put it in dollar signs and not percentages, and it's transparent. But that's not necessarily the case. I think what we've been able to see with our community is they love transparency. So just give that to them in your pricing, give it to them in your packages, and the good thing is, I think that we've got an opportunity to deserve the ongoing partnership rather than kind of have it in writing, like base it on the actual impact that you have on a client and win their trust over a year. Because like I said, most of our packages for 12 months. So we have a year to prove to them that they can continue on with us after that. And you might want to ask me about this, but that's one thing that I probably over-index to is people just want once off and then see you later. We're not a year through yet, but I would guess that somewhere between 30 and 50% want to keep the relationship, even though they don't have to, even though nothing that we do locks them in. So none of the platforms we use, none of the products we use, they can all self-manage that. And I think that's a real competitive advantage and it was fed directly from our community. They told us that's what they wanted.
What other trends are you sort of watching within your audience that are helping you build the advice business?
I think like the obvious trend is using ETFs for the basis of portfolios.
Yeah.
I think that most people know that ETFs are like a sensible way to build a portfolio. Even if it's not for everything, we know that they're not right in probably small caps, global small caps, real assets, private markets. There's so many places where ETFs and index funds are not the best solution for people. But I think if you lead with that, effectively you're doing a bit of like behavioral bias, a bit of Robert Cialdini here. You're marketing to people based on what you know that they're interested in. Yeah. And so if you lead with that, whereas if you start talking about platforms or wraps, people are a bit like, particularly right now, are a bit like, they're a bit allergic to that. Yeah. And so then if you talk about percentages on top of that, like you're commercially, you just don't stack up. And I think that's a real differentiator. I think one of the things that I've realized through the community too is just explain why you get to something. Like, for example, whether you use Hub24 or NetWealth, like from a consumer's point of view, they don't really care, but they will probably ask you because they want to know. So then explain to them why you chose one of those two things for your investments. And that will just give them more comfort to make a better decision. That was something that we spent a lot of time thinking about in the beginning, like myself and the advice team is like, well, what do we want to build that's in line with our brand? And then what are the tools that work for that? Not necessarily the other way around. Like unfortunately, a lot of the legacy advice profession pick tools that work for them first, and then they try and market it, which, it may make things easier in some respects, but for us, that was wrong way around.
Yeah.
So we kind of flipped that around.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good segue into how you thought about building your business more generally. You said you're less than a year in, but I'd love to know, like, take us back to when it was just an idea before you'd actually started building. What were some of the key assumptions that you had at that time that you've since realized were completely wrong?
Well, I got my financial forecast completely wrong. So,
in a good
positive way. In a good way. So, for someone who claims to be the chief investment officer,
a very conservative forecast, you could say.
Yeah. So, one of the great things about building an advice business the way that we're doing it is from a cash flow basis, you can drastically de-risk it by having fixed fees primarily up front. So you can effectively, like Daniel Priestley talks about this a lot in his kind of business coaching mantra, which is you build a wait list and then you get people to buy in at the wait list level. Then you get them to prepay for something and then that bankrolls your business a bit. So we were able to do that. And so people, based on the trust they already had for us and knowing what we were going to deliver, they could then effectively prepay for their advice, which then helped bankroll the business, right? And so that was a real competitive strength for us early on. And what I underestimated is like how many people would take us up on that and how quickly we would go from like, you'll get your financial plan in a few weeks to, well, we're recording this end of September. We're now telling people they won't get it until 2026.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I didn't expect that. Like I expected some teething issues, but I didn't expect us to scale that fast. This is with us still sending the vast majority of our community to referral partners, probably 80 to 90%.
So if you can't, no one can get in until 2026. Are you trying to hire more advisors?
Yeah.
Should we put a call out now?
If you're a financial advisor and you're listening, absolutely, I'd love that. Yeah. So if you are, even like the two other areas that we really need support are paraplanning. We don't use traditional paraplanning tools. We use RetireMap for people that aren't familiar, a great tool based out of Melbourne. It's primarily used by accountants and advisors that use have a lot of entities with their clients, because our clients, being DIY, they end up DIYing themselves into a trust upon a trust upon a trust upon a trust. And then you have to model that for them. Like, it's really complex. So we use RetireMap, which also keeps us agnostic from the general tools like X tools and that sort of stuff. So if you are listening and you're up for a challenge, we would love to hear from you. Doesn't matter where you're based, here in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, doesn't matter. Paraplanning and implementation would be great. The easiest way to get in contact with us is by the Rask website. So just rask.com.au/advice or /contact, either of those pages. You can just send us an email. And we would love to hear from anyone, because we can talk about it, but like finding the right team members in the advice landscape right now is tricky. Really, really tricky.
Yeah, it feels like that's the bottleneck for the scalable point. It's like you're still reliant on someone coming in and talking. Like, what areas of the business or resources have you used outside of that to, I guess, try and scale better than your competitors?
One of the things that we haven't done is we don't use industry tools. So I mentioned RetireMap for modeling, which is great, but we don't use any of the other tools. And there's been some really good influences on me, such as like Phil Thompson from Sky Wealth has been really generous. Alex Luck from Everest, both been really generous with their insights in this regard. The tools that we have as advice businesses in this country aren't necessarily built for the next generation of advice firms. And so some of them are trying and they're doing a good job, and I commend them for that. But we've been able to use traditional CRMs. Like, some of the best advice firms that I know we use ActiveCampaign, but some will use HubSpot or something similar to that. Like, I don't know what you guys use, but just whatever you guys are using is probably what most advice firms should be using. And then we use all of our stuff's digital. Surprisingly, no one really wants to come in the office and speak to us, which is wild considering we're dealing with millions and millions of dollars typically. And so we use Google Meets, and all of our transcripts are automatically recorded. It runs through basically this kind of light version of an AI, and it just parks it in our CRM for us as the file notes. So we don't have to do file notes. We do add our own from time to time if we correct it, but that innovation is rapid. So I'd encourage anyone to figure out how you can use that in a privacy sensitive manner.
Yeah.
But file notes, that sort of stuff is, it's something that you probably don't need to be doing. You just want to check. So those are examples of how we kind of just let the advisor spend time on strategy and clients, and let everything else run by itself or with the mid-office team. Yeah.
So accessibility and sort of, I guess, free education is a key part of what you've done over the years, and it's something that we're super passionate about. So how do you think about that accessibility point for your audience? Like, it's probably more than just fees, but I guess it always starts with fees. How do you sort of balance the free offering you've got with trying to make advice more accessible, with actually trying to earn a crust at the end of it all?
Yeah. It's a good point. I think if you're a good financial advice business, you're operating at margins of probably 20 to 30% in Australia, similar to accounting. If you're a good accounting business, that's what you'd be operating at. if you're offering something more like us, I think you're at the lower end of that. And so, like, if that's our kind of North Star, what else can we do to facilitate more advice? If we can't, for example, do something that's economical, like all of our advisors have the discretion to discount the fees as much as they want. All of our advisors can go, like, have full reign over that. Like they make a decision based on their workload. So that way it's not kind of like a centralized thing. Like there's core values and advice frameworks and whatever, but they make the decision based on their own workload, which is really good because then we can, from time to time, take clients that we know are not economical for our business and we just want to do the right thing. And we do that pretty often, to be honest. What we've seen in an adjacent world is obviously the rise of like ChatGPT, Claude, and from Anthropic, and all those types of tools. And they're increasingly solving the simple types of financial planning queries where people can get closer from what was probably in the past 80-20 rule to maybe like a 90-10, like 10% effort, 90% of the bang. And so we don't need to serve those clients necessarily as much as I thought we might have to a couple of years ago. And so they come armed with great questions and some general ideas. Oftentimes, like the AI is not good at math, obviously. It's not good at like the sequence of things and it can be very noisy. But at the same time, it does a good job of getting people advice ready. So when they can come for once-off advice. So I'd encourage people to try them. So for us as a business, my hope is that we can develop our systems to be so efficient, so efficient that eventually we bring down the cost of advice, not increase the cost of advice. And so, we've got one package at the moment, it's $5,000, which is it's a 6-month package. The client does the implementation. So we thought, what's the biggest bottleneck in most businesses at scale? It's implementation. So they do the implementation. If it's insurance, we have to do it because they don't have access to the same policies, but we'll do that. But we thought, well, how can we bring that, cost down? And so pulling things out that aren't maybe necessary for an advisor to do, and then say, hey, go and use a tool like an investment platform. And then what we do is we complement that with a community, similar to Pivot Wealth's Smarter Money Accelerator, or any one of those other firms that have, really good content. So we have these things called fact sheets at Rask. So we have the most popular one is debt recycling. It's kind of on the fringe of what people would trust AI to give them advice on. It definitely is. And it's on the fringe of what people are willing to DIY. So the way we kind of come at this is we'll do this really great guide for people to use and self-serve on our website. So they can get personal advice and it might say, hey, we suggest debt recycling for you. Obviously, we're not mortgage brokers. So we'll in the guide would have, here's 5 questions to ask your mortgage broker and you can send them this information. And then this is the guide that will guide you through the steps. And then at the quarterly coaching that's included in our packages, they can come back and we just get a touch point on where they're at. So in this way, we're effectively saying, well, you do some of it, we'll do some of it. Because you are more informed, we trust you to do this part of it and we'll do the more complicated bits. And that way it brings down the cost of advice.
What's the audience's appetite been for that sort of self-serve approach?
Incredible.
Yeah.
And there's 2 camps that go into that. The one camp is the younger demographic, kind of like our demographic. They love that. They're like, well, I already use BT Direct, Perla, ComSec, whatever. And they already use it. And they're like, I'm comfortable with that. Don't change me to some other thing. So we're like, cool, you do the investments. We'll just give you the kind of the recipe and you go and do it yourself. You make it yourself. The other group are people that are super wealthy, but want to be entirely DIY. And predominantly the reason why they choose to do that, I think, is they want the structure of the advice. They want the plan, but they don't want anyone messing with what they've already got going on because they're already like thinking that they're pretty good at what they do and blah, blah, blah. And oftentimes, like for example, even today, we have a lot of people that don't necessarily agree with our investment philosophy, but they want us to challenge them on their existing portfolio. And that's the primary reason they rock up is I'm willing to pay $5,000. I've got a $1 or $2 million portfolio. Tell me where I've gone wrong and I'll take it under advisement. But it doesn't mean that I'll do anything about it. And so that's a really common cohort around the 50 to 65 range.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You might disagree, but it feels, for the majority of people who come to get advice, it's not like overly complicated. And I think as people become to trust AI more and more and turn to that sort of DIY approach, like how do you think about the impact of AI on your business over the next, or maybe on the industry over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, especially as potentially regulation changes as well?
Yeah, if the regulation changes, at the moment we've only got like the one regulatory guide that governs robo-advice.
Yeah.
So as the regulation changes, people should be aware. You guys actually spoke about this in your Equity Mates podcast recently, where you talked about, I think it was like the journey from zero to whatever, I can't remember the title of the episode, but you talked about how it's really important to adopt new trends and to be at the forefront of technology that you talked about. In that one, you talked about like TikTok and gave it, if someone was starting out today, maybe podcasts aren't the right thing to do, but maybe these other things are. And I think that if you're starting out today like we are, or if you're even an existing business, you've got to figure out how you can leverage these tools, because someone else is going to do it if you don't. We don't tend to do the really simple advice. That's a really important point to understand. We tend to do the complicated ones.
Right.
Like some fellow the other day rocked up with, he had 8 trusts.
So but is that unnecessarily complicated?
It can be, depending on like
without knowing him. Yes,
they can be very entrepreneurial people and family office type people and these types of people. And so that's predominantly, like if you think about the range of complexity of cases that we deal with, the team and I talk about this a lot, is we deal with the 8, 9s, and 10s out of 10 for complexity. Because that's just where we've operated. We've cut our teeth on the more difficult cases. I would say that for the recontribution strategies, for the transition to retirement strategies, all that stuff, like AI is probably going to be here in the next year or two if it's not already.
Yeah.
Just through the off-the-shelf tools.
Yeah.
And so that's great for like industry funds and for the big players in the space that want to specialize in that. Where it's not going to be good is, we already know this right now, is the math. That it's really poor with math. And so getting the numbers right is important. And there are a lot of great tools in the startup phase at the moment. You guys have probably seen a few where it's like really interactive, really immersive experience using AI as a backbone to it, which is great. We share an office with Navexa, which does the tax reporting. And they came out with an AI tool recently, which was really cool. And just to give an insight into how it works, is all of the prompts are in language. So you would just talk to it. But all of the actual math is done in the core Navexa code because the AIs can't handle the code yet.
Yeah.
So until it gets to a point where it's precise, like really precise, you just can't trust it. So I think we're still a couple of years away. I think big picture though, like to give you a quick overview of how we run is you would do a goal setting session. You would have like after the fact find and all the information is gathered. And then we can push that straight into an AI agent that we have. So we could push it straight into a tool that we use. You anonymize it, you do all that sort of stuff. And it gives you, this is what I'm working on at the moment, it gives you what we call a paraplanning request form. So this is where you get to the stage of, you've got all this like information, whether it's super information, tax, income, whatever. And then you effectively have this agent that's trained on statements of advice and trained on legislation and trained on previous, like even if you just have strategies in there. And you can get to a document that then it gets handed to the paraplanning team and the modeling team to check. And their role is effectively to make sure it's not hallucinating, check with the advisor for any discrepancies, and then do the proper modeling in the software that we know has the latest Centrelink information, has the correct, tax rates, all that sort of stuff, which AI is just not keeping up with at the moment. And so then effectively you can get like 80% of the way there. And then on the presentation side, we use Canva and Google Docs. So you can use you can use Gemini to proof the document before it goes out. We use all the Google environments. So for us, for example, someone does the SOA and they need it peer reviewed. You just, in the document, you send it to the advice channel in our business, and someone can then add it to their task daily, add to their calendar, and then they jump straight in and they review it, right? And it's great because like frictionless, just moving between everything. I'm making it sound pretty, but it's pretty like scrappy in the beginning. But it gives you a sense that like, I don't think it's like all or nothing. So I don't think it's like we're going to be 100% AI advice or 100% in the next 3 years, maybe in 10 years. But where I am now, we've created a beta model I made it last year for modeling a full statement of advice from scratch.
Wow.
And using just inputs from Paperform, which is an online document and like form filling in thing. So you could effectively send it from paper form, push it through Zapier or whatever you want to do, or integrate it natively and push it straight to an AI engine and get a statement of advice.
Wow.
It's 75% of the way there. I just don't 100% trust them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we've got that.
yeah,
So I've
yeah.
got that.
It's
like,
crazy
yeah.
you can't do maths.
I know. It's like
you can
what,
do
it's-
everything
it's-
else. Isn't like
it's a collection of code.
Exactly.
Like surely it can
Yeah.
do math.
Can't
Like,
do math?
Yeah.
It's like,
it can
what?
write a novel. But
Literally. Literally.
Yeah, well, I
So
guess
together.
it's in the name, right? A language model. So
Yeah.
True.
the creative
need an
writers that went to
LMM.
uni aren't doing, finance math over here on the side. So maybe in the future it connects the two. But
Yeah. Even AI can't understand the power of compounding.
that's it. Yeah, it'll get there. It'll get there.
I guess we really want to drill into some of your expertise here and understand what advisors can learn from your knowledge and your experience in reaching their clients and building trust with potential clients. So let's start with just generally, how has your media background, podcasting and YouTube shaped your approach to building this business and client acquisition?
Oh, that's a good question. I think client acquisition is the easier one. Financial advice is all about trust. And so repeated messages that don't leave much shock or build shock. Like you don't rock up to the financial advice business and think it's going to be anything different to what you see in our content. It's really important. If you rocked up and then we had, really high percentage fees, or we had a really clunky CX or, customer experience, that wouldn't be in line with our brand. So you want your content to match the ethos of your business and how you actually operate. So that's been really good. In terms of just generally speaking, like the Australian financial advice landscape is chronically undersupplied. So I was chatting to a wonderful conglomerate just yesterday here in Sydney. I won't say who it is, but they've got a presence in advice and financial services, and they've figured it out as one of the 4 biggest trends in Australia's investment landscape, which is the financial advice and wealth management space. Because we've gone from like 30 to 40,000 advisors down to say 12. A few thousand of those are brokers. Some of them don't actually operate; they just have their license still, or they're on the register. And a lot of them only do like single types of advice, like insurance or investments only, or whatever. So you're left with like maybe say 4,000 advisors, realistically serving 140,000 people who retire every year, plus the 4 million that are already in retirement, plus a growing population, generally speaking, in accumulation phase. So in terms of it was kind of like a no-brainer. Like if I don't think we'll get an opportunity like this in our world of finance and media and stuff to have an adjacent service and an opportunity like this again. And with the ability to use technology increasingly to deliver advice, again, I don't think there's going to be a better opportunity. So there's kind of like this sweet spot of all these things have aligned, and it was just matching the content funnel to that advice, and knowing that we can't do it alone. I was actually thinking about coming up here today to record with you both, and I remember in the early days, Ren, you said to me that we do a lot of podcasts together over the years and whatever, and you always said that like people don't subscribe to one podcast; they have a few podcasts in their feed, and implying that we're not necessarily competitors, even though we have the same kind of business models or whatever. And I think about it similar to advice now. There's so many people that are in need of financial advice. I think a really good thing is like things like basis points and hearing from other advisors and networking with other advisors to learn from them and put that to practice in your business. And I'll give you some examples, like from Phil Thompson at Sky. His culture and HR mechanism is the most well-oiled machine I've seen. The processes of Everest is exceptional. Like the way James O'Reilly from Northeast communicates is unbelievable. The way Fox and Hare brand and communicate with their audience, exceptional. Like there's so many things that you can take from other people in the industry that create a really good business. We mentioned Pivot Wealth before with Ben Nash. He's got same with James Wrigley, great Instagram and TikTok game. I'm hearing of advisors that are building businesses solely on that at the moment. And they're growing really, really fast. And I think from a content perspective, you don't need to be like an Equity Mates or a Rask to build a really good advice business and to have that funnel. So just those few, pick one channel. I'd probably go with TikTok or Instagram just for real simple stuff. And that will be enough. You don't need to be one of these big funnels.
Well, for advisors thinking about getting into the content game or how they can leverage it further, like what content formats do you find work best for you to attract sort of like your ideal client?
I think the podcasts are the best for us because most people have listened for years. So it's really like if you're listening to this now, or even if you're watching, if you're listening to this, like you're in their ears, like they're in whatever, like they can hear us, and we can't hear them right now, but maybe when we catch up, we can. But I think that's a big one is like you're connecting with someone in a real intimate way. So for us, it's definitely been podcasts. Emails are a really big thing for us too, to stimulate activity. I wanted to ask you this because I know you guys do a lot of good emails now. Like the morning email at 6 a.m. is great. Would you buy wholesale emails, like building an email list right now?
I'd buy.
Yeah, I would buy and then buy again. I mean, I feel like with AI, the cost of producing content is going to get lower and lower. Like it'll get close to zero. And so if you're on a platform where you rely on an algorithm to surface content to your intended audience, you're going to be competing in a more saturated field. Email is this perfect unalgorithmic platform where if you have someone's contact and they signed up, you can just communicate point to point.
Yeah.
And that is going to become less, and there's going to be less and less opportunities for that. And so it's going to become more and more powerful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, there was a great HubSpot interview. CEO, the founder of HubSpot, was on the Shane Parrison Knowledge Project podcast, I think it's called, about a year or so ago. If you're interested in this sort of stuff, he talked about, because he's the founder of HubSpot, right? So he kind of gets CRMs and emails and stuff. And he's like, everything within your CRM is going to become more valuable. Everything outside is going to be more noisy. And I think like if you're an advisor listening to this, it's like, how do you build a simple nurture sequence? When you capture information, if you go to an event, is there a QR code that enables them to just go straight into your mailing list? That's definitely been powerful for us. It's really interesting. And I was just chatting to someone just this morning about the way we collect email addresses is through content online. Really interesting. Is our traffic to our website, even though we keep the bots off from scraping our website, it's up 97% year over year.
Wow.
And our email collection is the fastest it's ever been. So,
and what's the insights there? Like what's driven that?
I think when ChatGPT started to not just eat Google's cake, but to completely smash it, Google was like, oh, to hell with all these rules. Let's just pump content in the system. And we were one of the publishers that are in the news algorithms and all this sort of stuff. And we get pushed to people's mobiles every day. You can see it in the search data. People are still really engaged in that digital format, which, to your point, I thought maybe the written form, and I still have fears about this, I still have fears that the written form is not going to be as valuable going forward. But right now, I think that it is. And for the next couple of years, emails, all that sort of stuff is going to become really, really valuable. And if we've got AI, like you can use Google's, what is it, Performance Max or Meta's engine, I can't remember what it's called. But you can use a paid engine now to produce the content and then run the ads for you. You can just click a button.
Yeah.
And so, who's going to win from that? Well, Google and Facebook and all that's going to win from that. But there's no point of differentiation there. So organic content, I think, is still really valuable. Personal brands behind the camera is really important.
So personal brand behind the camera, like for a lot of advisors thinking about that who've built a business and not having to put themselves in front of a camera and then are now thinking about connecting with the next generation of clients, that's daunting. Like even for us, like getting the first few times in front of a camera, even just going from podcasting to behind a camera is daunting. What was some advice you'd give them and maybe some tips or some traps for new players to avoid?
I think like, so the first comment I'll make comes from Raul, who runs a wonderful community, a Portuguese speaking community based out of the Gold Coast. And he said to me once before that, if you look back on your first versions of your content and you don't cringe, you waited too long. And so what he meant by that was if you think it's going to be perfect, you're never going to get started because you're going to be fearful that that's never going to be right. And it isn't. So just go easy on yourself. The second thing that I would say is build up to it. So for example, if cameras and all that sort of stuff isn't for you, well, maybe one of the things that you can do is just comment on other people's stuff. That's a really powerful way to add insights. And I used to do this early days when I was trying to be like an analyst and network and that sort of stuff, is I would jump onto people like fund managers' profiles on LinkedIn or Twitter/X, and I would just comment and be like, "Hey, this is a great insight about this company. Have you thought about blah?" And just to start to build that kind of reflex of it's okay to be in the public domain. From there, I'd probably gear up to say just doing like publishing text, whether it's on LinkedIn or whatever. And then from there, I would start to then explore, well, maybe I start to do video from that point or something really kind of this, whatever that next step is for someone to remove that anxiety, but just build up to it. Like I don't think you come on the Equity Mates podcast network and on day one and expect that you're going to nail it. So I don't even want to ask how many podcasts you guys have done. I imagine it'd be thousands.
Yeah, thousands. Yeah.
So
But we're not advisors.
No.
no, that's it. That's it. And so it's just about like not expecting perfection from the get-go. A lot of advisors are hamstrung by their licensees. And I think that for the most part, you don't need to talk about financial advice-y things to do good content. You can just talk about like cash flow strategies, budgeting tools, retirement writ large. You don't have to talk about, what this ETF does or what that insurance contract should be or whatever the case may be. You don't need to do that.
So, Owen, we want to move to a couple of closing questions about, I guess, where you see the future of advice. So just generally, where do you see the advice industry in Australia heading?
I think we're going to have a lot more advisors join because I'm seeing that we are getting a lot of good advisors under, say, 25.
Okay.
So a lot of the unis, like a good one is at Deakin University in Victoria. They now have a dedicated financial planning qualification and is specifically designed to produce kind of like advice-ready professionals, still young and need to do their professional year and all that. But I think we're going to have a lot more good advisors at the younger end. So if you're an older advisor listening to this, if you're already in motion, I think it's a great opportunity for you to adapt to some of the new ways of doing things, but also to accelerate and stand out in the crowd that's going to be predominantly younger. The other aspect I think that, and something that we're leaning heavily into is coaching. So we see ourselves more as coaches rather than, people that are updating spreadsheets. Because like your competitive advantage is not a spreadsheet. Like we've had X tools or God knows what for 10 or 20 years now. Your competitive advantage is not doing a better model than someone else. Your competitive advantage is in the way you convey it, the relationships you have. And that's why I don't think advice is necessarily going away. I just think the form of it will change. And so I think that's a big, big competitive strength for people is to lean into your coaching, get better at behavioral finance. And in doing so, that complements everything else you do in your business. It complements your marketing, complements just the relationships you have as well. So I'd lean into that.
Well, Owen, if you could leave us with one piece of advice to someone thinking about building their own advice business or perhaps building their own book within an established business, what would that be?
I think it would just be maybe just try and be like expose your authentic self in your advice, because when you're giving advice, it's a very sacred thing. Like you are a professional leaning into someone's personal finances. And so when you communicate, whether it's online, whether it's in person or whatever, just try and be your authentic self as much as possible. And I think that this is more so for existing advisors, is if you're in a practice and you don't agree with the principles, maybe it sounds kind of crude, but maybe leave. Maybe go somewhere where you are getting these things on offer now because they are coming through. And if you're a new advisor, is build your own personal brand as much as you possibly can. Because like it's easy for me to say that. It'd be easy for you guys to say that. But just in general, if you want to demand a higher salary, if you want to, attract the right type of clients, you need something to attract them with. And a lot of times that's your personal brand. You can take it with you. So I would just say lean into that personal brand. Unless you're doing like some mass market scaled advice, which is basically Australian Super and Host Plus and all those. You're not in that game, then just build that personal brand, forge that. And I think lean into the content.
Love it.
Well, Owen, thank you for joining us today, sharing some of your insights. All the best for I was about to say the next year, but next however many years of your advice business.
Decades.
Yeah.
Thanks, lads. And likewise, right back at this.
Thanks, Owen.